Good morning, foxes and badgers class, and welcome to our second reading lesson of the week. Now, this week we were looking at lots of different poems, and today we are going to look at a poem called Mistoffelees. So, we're going to start by reading the poem, then we'll have a look at the vocabulary, and then we'll have another look at the poem again after. Mr. Mistoffelees. You ought to know Mr. Mistoffelees, the original conjuring cat. There can be no doubt about that. Please listen to me and don't scoff. All his inventions are off his own bat. There's no such cat in the metropolis. He holds all the patent monopolies for performing surprising illusions and creating eccentric confusions at prestigation and at legerdemain. He'll defy examination and deceive you again. The greatest magicians have something to learn from Mr. Mistoffelees' conjuring turn. Presto! Away we go, and we all say, "Oh, well I never was there ever a cat so clever as magical Mr. Mistoffelees." He is quiet and small, he is black, from his ears to the tip of his tail. He can creep through the tiniest crack. He can walk on the narrowest rail. He can pick any card from a pack. He is equally cunning with dice. He is always deceiving you into believing that he's only hunting for mice. He can play any trick with a cork, or a spoon and a bit of fish paste, if you look for a knife or a fork, and you think it is merely misplaced. You have seen it one moment, and then it is gone. But you'll find it next week lying out on the lawn. And we all say, "Oh, well I never was there a cat so clever as magical Mr. Mistoffelees." His manner is vague and aloof. You would think there was nobody shyer, but his voice has been heard on the roof when he was curled up by the fire. And he's sometimes been heard by the fire when he was about on the roof. At least we all heard somebody who heard, which is incontestable proof of his singular magical powers, and I have known the family to call him in from the garden for hours while he was asleep in the hall. And not long ago this phenomenal cat produced 7 kittens right out of a hat. And we all say, "Oh, well I never was there ever a cat so clever as magical Mr. Mistoffelees." Okay, let's have a look at some of the vocabulary that came up within that poem. So it said he was the original conjuring cat. Now, conjuring, you might be able to have a guess at this point. Now we've read the whole of the poem. The poem is about a cat who is good at magic tricks. So they think that he is a real magical cat. So conjuring means doing tricks that seem like magic. Okay, it says, "Don't scoff." Now, scoff means to talk to somebody in quite a disrespectful way because you don't believe them. So when they're saying "don't scoff," it means like, I'm telling the truth here. What are you saying? It's really happened. There's no such cat in the metropolis. Now, metropolis is the biggest city in an area. So if I'm thinking about the metropolis, the one that often comes to my head is New York, because that's the biggest city within an area in America. If we're thinking about in England, perhaps we've got London, which is the biggest metropolis in the southeast of England. He holds all the patent monopolies. That means he has all of the ideas and they're his, so they're always known as being his ideas. Now this word here is very tricky to pronounce. You pronounce it prestidigitation, and it means when you perform magic tricks to entertain people. Prestidigitation. And if you can have a go at saying that word. Now, legerdemain, again, is one that I haven't heard of, and so I had to use my dictionary and look it up to see what it means. And it turns out that legerdemain means that somebody's very good at using their hands to perform magic tricks. So I'm thinking perhaps if I was watching somebody do a card trick and they're so good at sleight of hand that they can swap the cards around without me having any idea. His manner is vague and aloof. So vague means we're not quite sure about something. And aloof means he's quite distant. He's not a very friendly character as such, which is incontestable proof. That basically means you can't argue with it. It's definitely right if it's incontestable proof. Okay, now we've had a look at that vocabulary, let's go back to our poem and check that we understood it. So, you ought to know, Mr. Mistoffelees, the original conjuring cat. So we spoke about how that means he performs magic. There can be no doubt about that. Please listen to me and don't scoff. All his inventions are off his own bat. So I'm thinking that that means all of the inventions he came up with by himself. There's no such cat in the metropolis. He holds all the patent monopolies. So again, we were speaking about how in that city, he's the person with all of those ideas. For performing surprising illusions and creating eccentric confusions. At prestidigitation and at legerdemain, we spoke about those tricks that he was performing, he'll defy examination and deceive you again. So everybody is falling for his magic tricks. The greatest magicians have something to learn from Mr. Mistoffelees' conjuring turn. So he's the best magician around. Presto, away we go, and we all say, oh, well, I never, was there ever a cat so clever as magical Mr. Mistoffelees? Now, do we think this cat's really magical? Or do we think that maybe he just acts like a cat and is quite cheeky and sly, perhaps, and so his owners might not always know where he is? He is quiet and small, he is black. From his ears to the tip of his tail, he can creep through the tiniest crack, he can walk on the narrowest rail. So we're describing the cat here, aren't we? And we're telling our reader what he looks like so they can paint that image in their head, and a bit about his personality. He can pick any card from a pack. He is equally cunning with dice. He is always deceiving you into believing that he's only hunting for mice. So he's always tricking his owners into thinking that he's hunting for mice, but really that's not what he's up to at all. He can play any trick with a cork, or a spoon and a bit of fish paste. If you look for a knife or a fork, and you think it is merely misplaced, you have seen it one moment, and then it is gone, but you'll find it next week lying out on the lawn. So this cat is a bit mischievous, if you ask me. He's always hiding things that belong to his owners. Let's have a look at this word here, gone. Now, I've never heard of the word gone, but if we read again, you have seen it one moment, and then it is gone, but you'll find it next week laying out on the lawn. I think I've worked out what the author's done here. They realise that lawn rhymes with gone, but gone isn't a real word. The poet has made it up. They mean gone, and they've just changed the spelling so that it fits into rhyme with lawn. And we all say, oh, well, I never, was there ever a cat so clever as magical Mr. Mistoffelees? His manner is vague and aloof. You would think there was nobody shyer. We spoke about that earlier, about how he's pretending to be quite distant with people, quite unfriendly, he's quite shy, he pretends that he doesn't want to speak to people, quite quiet. But his voice has been heard on the roof when he was curled up by the fire. And he's sometimes been heard by the fire when he was about on the roof. At least we all heard somebody who heard, which is incontestable proof. Now remember, this bit means it definitely happened. There's no point trying to argue, it's definitely true. Of his singular magical powers, and I have known the family to call him in from the garden for hours, while he was asleep in the hall. So again, tricking his owners here. They thought he was outside, they spent ages trying to get him in, and turns out he was asleep in the hall the whole time. Perhaps he might be curled up somewhere, so they haven't spotted him. And not long ago, this phenomenal cat, this amazing cat, produced 7 kittens right out of a hat. And we all say, oh, well, I never. Was there ever a cat so clever as magical Mr. Mistoffelees? Okay, if we go back to our PowerPoint then. So as always, we've got our retrieval questions to begin with. Then there's a few other questions that you'll have to use your brain for. A few of them require inference, so remember that's where the author doesn't tell us, but we can work it out from the text. And then at the end of the PowerPoint, there is a link. Now, if you click on this link, it will take you to a video of how Mr. Mistoffelees is performed nowadays. I wonder if any of you might actually recognise this when you watch the video. It might not be how you were expecting the poem to be performed at all. As always, please do send your answers in to your teachers so that we can mark them and see how you have got on.